All right, everybody, we're going to wait just another minute or so, and then we'll get going. Thanks for the patience. All right, everybody, we're going to wait. All right, I'll kick things off now. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Jasper Craven. I am a freelance journalist covering the VA and veterans issues. I'm also a policy fellow at VHPI and serving in an interim role right now as executive director. I'm just going to quickly introduce the other panelists here. I'll keep admitting folks as they join, and then I'll give my spiel, and then we'll move on. So today we have on the call Suzanne Gordon, who has spent many, many years covering the VA. She has authored or edited 21 books. She's a patient advocate and journalist whose work has appeared in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, the Nation, the Atlantic, Washington Monthly, many other publications. Over the last 5 years, Suzanne has reported on the VA and interviewed hundreds of veterans and their caregivers, lawmakers, and healthcare professionals, mostly about the Veterans Health Administration. Her first book on the subject, The Battle for Veterans Healthcare, Dispatches from the Front Lines of Policymaking and Patients' Care, revealed how the Koch brothers and conservative lawmakers used the VA waitlist crisis to advance VA privatization. She's also the author of Wounds of War, How the VA Delivers Health, Healing, and Hope to the Nation's Veterans, which goes deep on all the good the VA does across the country. We also have on the line Russell Lemley, who is the VA Community Care Work Group Lead for the Association of VA Psychologist Leaders and is a clinical professor at the University of California, San Francisco Medical School. From 1981 to 2018, Russell worked at the San Francisco VA healthcare system, the last 25 years of which he served as chief psychologist. He obtained his doctorate from SUNY Buffalo in 1979. His pre-doctoral internship at UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute and postdoctoral fellowship at UCSF. He is a fellow of the American Psychological Association and in 2017, the Association of VA Psychologist Leaders named an award in his honor. We also have on the line Paul Sullivan, sort of a late addition who is new as well to the VHPI team. Paul is a veteran and is basically on the Veterans Benefits Administration, which we here at VHPI are endeavoring to explore more in the coming months. And so Paul is here with us to talk a bit about some of the challenges, opportunities inside VBA moving forward. There's also some other vets and union leaders on the call who may share their thoughts as we move forward. So the subject of today's forum is on the future of the VA. And everyone here, obviously, I'm just going to let some more people in. Sorry about that. Everyone here is fairly familiar with VA, it seems. We'll mute these people. And so I don't think I need to go through each and every detail about the last 4 years of the VA, but to say there's been massive changes in how the VA's been run. It's really been a pivotal time inside the VA for anyone who's been paying attention. The Trump administration is almost over. It looks like we're headed towards divided Congress and a Democratic administration. And so these shifting politics in Washington offer many opportunities as well as challenges for the VA moving forward. And so that's what we're here to discuss. As a journalist, chiefly myself, I am going to sort of kick things off and talk a little bit about how the VA can regain trust and make a number of ethical reforms moving forward that can help improve the department's reputation and functioning. I have been covering the VA on and off since the 2014 wait time scandal in Phoenix, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And what I have noticed over the last 6 years, but especially in the last 4, is that the VA has really closed itself off to oversight. This includes journalists, but also Congress. You know, I've got many sources on Capitol Hill who, for the last 4 years, have really vented to me about problems with the Office of Congressional Affairs inside the VA. There have been officials there who seemingly have an overwhelmingly political attitude and who have really slowed down the processing of information, basic requests about key veterans issues, mental health, veteran suicide, other things that are brought forward by constituents. These are taking far, far too long to be addressed by the Office of Congressional Affairs. The VA needs to fix this. The VA needs to work cooperatively with Congress. It needs to acknowledge when issues are pointed out. It needs to address them. I mean, one good example here is the VA police. I wrote a number of years ago, I guess not too long ago, for The Intercept about the VA police, which is one of the largest federal police departments in the country. Sort of not really well known, though, to the average person that it's sort of all happening on VA grounds. There were a number of serious concerns brought about the police. A number of veteran patients who had been allegedly abused by the police tried to get answers, tried to get help from Congress or the VA, and there was very little cooperation or acknowledgement of issues there. There has been legislation proposed in the House to reform the VA police, but the VA has not been cooperative in those efforts. And, you know, more broadly, we've seen VA Secretary Robert Wilkie refuse to testify before Congress about a number of serious issues around oversight, around the VA, around the VA Mission Act, which, as many of you probably know, is set to cost billions of dollars as more and more veterans are pushed out into the private sector, which is less accountable than the VA. So one thing that I think we need to really all focus on for the future is sort of improving that relationship between the VA, between Congress, between the press. Another good thing to do would be to improve the relationship between VA and veteran service organizations. Again, I've heard from a lot of advocates at the VFW, at the American Legion, at DAV, at all of the big storied membership-based veteran service organizations, IVA as well, that their concerns are not being listened to, that they're not being invited in for crucial discussions, that you know, their members' concerns are not being heard. This is unacceptable. And, there are a plethora of policy changes in which VSO input really would have helped, and in many cases totally pulled the rug out from under VSOs. One indicative example comes with the long-held sort of rule that allowed members of VSOs to look at disability applications before they were finalized, so that they could, sort of be there for the veteran, make sure that that these applications were solid and that the VA wouldn't mess around on them. A number of months ago, the VA just totally revoked that privilege and totally froze out VSOs from having that opportunity to help the veteran. This makes no sense. There's no political reason for this to happen. There's no policy reason for this to happen. It needs to end. VSOs need to be brought to the table. And related to that, AstroTurf and ideological interests that have really taken an interest in the VA in recent years need to have their power checked. Early on in the Trump administration, I analyzed the amount of lobbying, the amount of corporate donations that were going to the Senate and House Veterans Affairs committees. And what I found was a huge spike. I'm talking exponential in the amount of money that was funneled into these committees, as well as the number of lobbyists who were working on VA issues. Chris Goldsmith, who used to work at Vietnam Veterans of America, put it quite well, where he said, it's a hard battle now. We are the little guy. The veteran groups aren't very well heeled. They have power in their rhetoric, in their membership, who are widely respected in politics, but they're dealing with multinational corporations, major healthcare interests that really know how to work Congress. And what we've seen from that is a lot of policy that's been pushed through on a bipartisan basis that has seemed at times to favor corporate interests, private interests, ideological interests, rather than the veteran. That needs to stop. There are many ways to do that. And, we can certainly get into some of those later in the conversation. But, one would be for the Biden administration to institute more aggressive requirements to slow the revolving door between Congress and lobbying. A great example here is Jeff Miller, the former chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee. He was a big proponent of the 2014 VA Choice Act, largely considered the first major step in VA privatization. And as soon as Trump came into office, he basically became a well-paid lobbyist. And, there is a cooling off period for lawmakers who enter lobbying, but the rules are very, very weak. Basically, you're still allowed to lobby on specific issues as long as you serve a background role. You're not really the main man out there. And there's also no ban on lobbying the executive branch. So as my reporting showed, Jeff Miller, very early in the Trump administration, got a number of major clients with interest in the VA and engaged with the White House in ways that seemed to then result in big contracts and other policies that benefited these interests. So the Biden administration, Congress, whomever, they need to work to really ensure that veterans policymaking is not corrupted by special interests. And so, and really this, the VA is the final frontier here. For a very long time, the VA was able to resist this sort of partisanship and these special interests for a number of reasons, including just the fact that the committees were less partisan, excuse me. And really, were pushed, goosed by the VSOs, the veterans groups that had a lot of power and ensured that the policies that were passed were in the best interest of the veteran. That power is waning now, and we need to ensure that it's not totally eclipsed and that these special interests don't take over. There's a number of other specific changes I think that can happen. One would be to improve wait times for Freedom of Information Act requests. This is more of a journalistic tool. But, I have requested very basic like calendars for VA officials, VA secretaries. I got the calendar for the first VA secretary under Trump, David Shulkin, and that was very illuminating, and that it showed who he was meeting with, how he was being lobbied and pitched. But I requested the exact same documents for VA Secretary Robert Wilkie and still have not had it answered. Robert Wilkie's VA has slowed down FOIA requests to a snail's pace. That needs to stop. And there's legislation that's been introduced by former Representative Max Rose that can just be repackaged that would improve the FOIA process. We should also note that a lot of veterans use the FOIA process. A lot of VA employees use the FOIA process in their own cases and trying to understand going on at the VA, at their hospital. This is all positive. The last thing I'll say before I move on is that the VA press office needs to be depoliticized and it needs to be open to the press again. Every time, really without fail, that I ask a VA spokesperson at the local level for some help with the story, it goes up to the national office. VA spokespeople at hospitals are no longer allowed to engage in the press for whatever reason. I understand that the VA wants a unified message and they can certainly chime in on these things. But as Suzanne Gordon told me recently for a story, you know, back under Obama, the VA press operation phone call. But you know, she was given wide latitude to explore the VA, and what that did was allow her to speak to folks on the local level and hear a lot of the really good things that the VA is doing. That allows the public to understand the VA, how it works. It also allows veterans to understand the VA and may you know, encourage them to go to the VA. It may pique their interest. And as the data shows, you know, if veterans can get into the VA, their health outcomes improve. Those are sort of the main topics that I am going to speak about. Suzanne is supposed to speak next, but it looks as if she, oh, is she back? Okay, so Suzanne is next, and I will unmute her, or she's unmuted herself. Great. So Suzanne, please take it from here.
Thank you. Sorry about that. It was a child calling me. They grow up, but they never stop being your kid. So I think that Jasper has hit on some really important issues. Certainly this issue of outreach to the public and to veterans is really critical, and it very much shapes the view of the public towards what we consider to be the most successful and certainly the largest healthcare system in the country, and one that should be a model for other healthcare systems. And I want to really start on that sort of positive note. The VA really has to be liberated by the next administration and by Congress to talk about the good things that it does, and to really reach out to Congress and to the media and to veterans to talk about what's happening. And I just want to give you an example of how over the period of the Obama and Trump administrations, this closed down. The VA, and we talked about this in a prior forum, the VA actually has done amazingly well because it's a coordinated, integrated system in healthcare disparities. It's always done well in healthcare disparities. So that means that people of color and poor people, you know, don't suffer the kinds of problems that they suffer from in the private sector healthcare system. And we've seen this in relationship to COVID deaths. In the VA, you see veterans having more test positive for COVID, but they aren't dying in greater numbers from COVID. And the VA, they've been a study that's just done on that, and you are not allowed by the Trump VA to talk to people, the people in the VA system who worked on that study. I've tried for over a month. I can't even talk to them on background. Now this, I think we really have to pay attention to this here, because the closing down of the Office of Congressional and Legislative Affairs and the media started under the Obama-Biden administration. And so really Biden will have to reverse not only a Trump policy, but a policy that was started, it's worse under Trump, but in degree not kind. And they will have to start that so that the VA is liberated to tell the story to the nation. We need to have almost a book on, and actually David Shulkin did actually write that book called Best Care Everywhere, which the Trump administration then suppressed because it talked too much about the good things in the VA. But we need a book about best practices in the VA, because we certainly are seeing that under COVID. And let me start with some things that I think need to be done immediately under COVID. I think that they've restarted the community care program after they halted it in March and April. We're now seeing huge surges. That has to be immediately halted again. We cannot be sending veterans out into these healthcare systems where they are not giving people enough PPE, where they're overwhelmed, and where the VA can take care of them. I think we need to really look very seriously at the Biden transition team on the VA. This is not a reassuring team. Some of the people are very good. People like Kayla Williams, who is an Iraq vet and used to be the director of the Office of Women Veterans before she was essentially pushed out by Trump. She's wonderful. There's some other people that are very good on it, but it is actually quite a startling and worrisome group. Two people are from Ascension Healthcare. One was in the VA, Bali Yahia, who testified several times in front of Congress. And when he was asked by Joe Manchin if private sector providers under any continuation of choice, i.e. the Mission Act, should be held to the same rigorous standards as the VA, he very clearly said, no, they should not, because if we hold them to these standards, they will not join the program. And now Yahia is the head of the medical group at Ascension Healthcare. And so he has even more reason to not want his providers that are getting veterans as patients to come in to have to, to have to stick to these very important standards that the VA has. We have this is really an astonishing fact. There is not a single VSO representative on this 14-member team. The transition team for the Department of Labor, which has 23 members, has 6 union representatives. So there's no VSO voice. Not the new VSOs, the old VSOs. Fortunately, CVA isn't there, but this is worrisome. And the Biden, we need to push the Biden administration, because I think that in Biden's platform on the VA and in question and answers to, I believe it was Military Times, there was a worrisome acceptance of outsourcing of private sector care. This has to be reversed, and Russell Lemley will talk more about this, and so will Paul Sullivan. But definitely, we have to also reverse, I think, the disastrous decision made under Secretary Wilkie to implement the Mission Act and really violate its intent. The intent of the Mission Act, and it's written into the Mission Act, says that you should be outsourcing care to the private sector only for medical necessity. And instead of abiding by what was the intent, or what the VSOs and the Democrats who supported it, in our view, misguidedly, but nonetheless, it said that it should be medical necessity, and instead Wilkie made it drive time and wait time, and initiated and implemented standards, like if you have to drive 30 minutes or 60 minutes to a VA facility. This has really been a disaster, and that should be reversed. I think Congress needs to really consider, and I hope VSOs will push this, really consider the cost of this private sector outsourcing. We have talked at VHPI to many, many people in the VA across the country, and we have found out at a very granular level what is being allowed and the extraordinary expense. Let me give you one example. Veterans are allowed to go to any emergency room that is a mile away from a VA hospital, a mile away from a VA hospital, with the taxpayer paying the bill, and that's way more expensive. A transplant in one locality, I believe it was a kidney transplant, in the private sector costs $1 million. In the VA, with the veteran having to fly somewhere and his or her family having to fly somewhere, it's $150,000. An air ambulance to bring somebody into a VA hospital can cost up to 60, 80 grand, 60 probably. And they used to be allowed to get to go to somebody that would lower the fee to about 8, and that is being disallowed now. You start multiplying, $1 million times 100, 60 grand times 100,000. That's a lot of money. ER visits that don't have to happen. Congress and the administration have to have oversight over the amount of private sector care. There is no insurance company in the world, in America, that will allow that basically says the sky's the limit, right? And in one of the reasons why Ascension Healthcare lobbied so much, and TriWest and all these groups lobby so much for the Mission Act and for all these other subsequent outsourcing acts, is because in the kind of private sector insurance that everybody else has, there is oversight on how many visits you can have, on the quality of the care, and so forth. But under the Mission Act, it's the sky's the limit. You want 100 acupuncture sessions, go for it. And that's why these hospitals want this kind of outsourcing, because in everywhere else that they deal with, there are limits put on number of visits, what kind of services you get, and so forth. That's a kind of defensive or rollback, and there's many more things that can be rolled back, and Paul Sullivan, I believe, will talk about Comp and Pen and the VBA, but so I'm not going to go there. But we need expansion. We need to recalculate how the VA budget is determined, for example, because the VA budget is determined on prior use, not in anticipation of future use. Well, we know that veteran unemployment under COVID, and that was the first surge, went from 3% to 12%. That means that there's going to be an exponential increase in the number of veterans that will need VA care because they've lost their job and lost their health care. We need more money, more staff, more exam rooms to accommodate that. And that was the first surge. That was the first surge. We're now going into a second, who knows, third surge, et cetera. So we need to accommodate those veterans. Michael Blecker, and I'm not sure where, I guess when Russell and Paul are finished, Michael will talk, but we need to expand VA benefits to the almost 600,000 veterans right now who have other than honorable discharges. That just should be gone. Congress can make that go, and the administration can deal with that in an executive order. Congress can deal with it in legislation to redefine who a veteran is, but this is absolutely inexcusable. And Michael will talk more about that. There's various strategies to do this. And at the very minimum, a new VA secretary has to support the petition for rulemaking change that Michael will talk to you about. And we also believe that limitations on the GI Bill and educational benefits for veterans, like Chris Goldsmith, who spoke at another of our meetings, who have get general discharges, they need to be allowed to get their education paid for so that they aren't stuck in these dead-end jobs like all the hundreds of thousands of veterans who are losing their jobs under COVID. I think it's a very exciting time. We're very excited at VHPI. We're nervous because I think that that we often think that, well, you get the Democrats in, problem solved. No, this is the beginning of a journey, not the end of a journey. And we believe that we can push, we can educate the public, we can educate healthcare reform groups, but we need to educate because, for example, there is a kind of progressive discussion about how you need to end privatization of education, how you need to fix all these different agencies that Trump has heard of, and veterans are not even on the radar. They're not even mentioned. VA privatization isn't even mentioned. So we have a lot of work to do. We really hope also that the VSOs will abandon their embrace of private sector care and jump on the bandwagon of expansion to veterans with bad paper discharges and to really supporting the VA and getting a better message out. Right now, the message of the Democrats and too many of the VSOs has been negative as opposed to positive, and then what we need to do to fix things. Because obviously, every human being, every human organization, particularly in the larger it is, has problems. But we need a more sort of glass is half full rather than glass is half empty approach, we think, from the Media Congress and the VSOs. And we think that there's a lot that can be done. And I know Russell and Paul and Michael and folks, we're also going to ask folks from the unions to talk about the disastrous anti-worker agenda that the Trump administration has pushed. So Russell, I guess it's Russell, right?
Yeah, Russell, go for it.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to focus on half a dozen mental health issues in terms of the future, in the immediate future for the VA. And many of these are issues that were percolating over the last couple of years, but still remain on the table. So I want to take an opportunity just to put them forward because they're all going to be real important to the coming administration. The first, as was talked about a little bit by Suzanne, has to do with requiring community care network providers to have quality standards to treat veterans' mental health conditions. The CCM providers who now treat the common psychological conditions of veterans have no minimum competency standards at all. License is all they need. The VA Mission Act, Section 133, had meant to fix this deficit by directing competency standards to be set for CCM providers who treat veterans for PTSD, TBI, and MST, but the VA defied Congress and never followed through with establishing requirements. So CCM providers continue to treat veterans without any verified training or competence. Recently introduced legislation, which was called the VA Clinical Team Culture Act, would require that CCM mental health providers complete a very basic 4-module course about military culture and core competencies for treating veterans with PTSD, TBI, and MST. And that would at least give the right message that there ought to be quality standards in the community like there are in the VA. I'm, of course, talking about mental health. Same really could be said for all care, but the Mission Act at least had been very clear that mental health competency standards needed to be established. That's yet to happen. Secondly, and relatedly, it's important that the CCM providers have training in basic suicide prevention. Basic training in suicide prevention that's mandated for all VA providers is simply voluntary for CCM providers. A license is all they need to currently evaluate and treat veterans. So we need to assure that these providers have training in suicide prevention. And then thirdly and relatedly, I think we ought to be requiring CCM providers to have training in lethal means safety counseling. The White House Prevents Task Force recommended comprehensive training with professionals who regularly engage with veterans on temporarily limiting access to lethal means during times of heightened vulnerability to suicide. And the Prevents recommendations need to be adopted. Representative Underwood's Lethal Means Safety Training Act legislation would go a long way to doing so. That, of course, had come up in September in Congress and it laid fallow there, but we ought to bring it back. And that's legislation that the VA and that requires VA and CCN mental health providers and many others with frequent contact with veterans to receive lethal means safety counseling training. Fourth, I think we need to assure that veterans receive mental health care during the transitional first year when a disproportionate number of veteran suicide attempts occur. That was the intention 2 years ago of Executive Order 13822 that would have provided veterans automatic access to mental health care for the first year after leaving military service. But when the action plan for that EO was drafted, it left out the provision of mental health care during the first year of transition. That care really is needed. And further veterans would also benefit from treatment of conditions interrelated to suicide, such as pain. Now, the recent John Scott Hannon bill originally had those benefits in the language that passed the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, but they were removed at the 11th hour, so what was passed excluded them. Veterans need those health benefits. Also coming up, or that did come up in September, was legislation that introduced a smooth transition for automatic enrollment of eligible veterans who are coming out of the military with an easy alternative to opt out. And that would also be incredibly helpful for providing particularly mental health, but really health benefits for veterans to receive them in the VA. The fifth, I want to just talk a little bit about the mental health staffing gap. There is a mental health which needs actually urgent attention. A recent VHA directive, which is 1161, requires facility outpatient mental health staffing ratio to be a minimum of 7.72 outpatient clinical mental health FTEs per 1,000 mental health patients. And as of the first quarter of FY 2020, only 42% of healthcare systems met the minimum outpatient mental health staffing level. And that's an alarming problem, given the reported connection between staffing shortages and suicide. So in terms of the coming year, we ought to be making sure that all stations be mandated to at least meet the required minimum staffing ratio. Sixth, I just want to say that I think it would be helpful, and Suzanne was talking a little bit about rolling back kind of general access standards, but I want to just talk for a second about changing the official access standard during COVID to include telemental health as meeting the 20-day standard for available care. For veterans who are already in active CCN face-to-face mental health treatment when COVID hit, the ethical thing to do was to move them to telehealth. But CCN telehealth should only occur when the VA doesn't itself have the capacity, and that doesn't appear to be what's happening. VA has not changed its rules for CCN eligibility during COVID, so that if a VA face-to-face mental health appointment can't be scheduled within 20 days, the veteran's given the option of care in the community. And that's true even if the VA could provide a telemental health visit immediately. And we've talked to a number of stations where that's the case. But once a veteran is referred to Optum or TriWest, those networks are given total freedom to provide telemental health, which circumvents VA's telehealth services that are the most integrated, high-quality, veteran-centric, and convenient telehealth that's out there. When VA has a capacity, there's no reason for CCN telehealth, and paying for a provider sector to provide services the VA could do better and quicker is an unnecessary financial drain on the system and accelerates privatization. I think if there's time later, it'd be helpful for us to talk a little bit about the AIR Commission, but I'm going to kick this over to Paul Sullivan.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And that was really good, by the way. I appreciate it, Russell. Let me zoom way out here and talk about the Veterans Benefits Administration, and I'll keep it focused there. The current undersecretary is Paul Lawrence. We all know that he's going to be leaving, but we don't know who his replacement is. So starting from the top, we don't know who's going to be in charge of any veteran benefits or any of the other sections within VBA that handle education benefits, home loan guarantees, as well as the life insurance, vocational rehabilitation. We don't know who's going to be in charge of any of those major departments. Let me put this in perspective. When the Gulf War started 30 years ago, VA's budget was $29 billion. Here we are in the 30th year of the war, and VA's budget is now $243 billion. War is very expensive. And what happens is that VA numbers crunchers and the OMB, Office of Management and Budget numbers crunchers, as well as the Congressional Budget Office numbers crunchers, they know that if the government as a whole wishes to slow VA spending increases, the way to do that is to slowly reduce or close the door on veterans applying for any types of benefits. Because as we know, a veteran needs to win service connection in most cases before the veteran can get free care. So trying to open the door on benefits further opens the door on care. Let's start off, I guess, with a little bit of good news, bad news. In 2012, the VA inventory, that's the number of claims sitting out there, was almost 1 million. In the early part of this year, it's good news, it was beat down to about 300,000. And a lot of that can be attributed to hiring more people, new computers, the Appeals Modernization Act. Those are all good things. However, now the claim inventory is pushing 500,000. That's a direct function of COVID and the economic crisis and the failures of the current administration. VBA knows that when the economy goes down, claims go up. Okay, so I want to be very clear on that. There's another area for VA claims that's distressing, and that's the Board of Veterans Appeals and what's called the legacy or pre-2019 appeals, where the veteran wanted an in-person hearing with a Board of Veterans Appeals veteran law judge, or VLJ. There's tens of thousands of those claims that have been sitting there between 5 and 10 years, and the Board of Veterans Appeals still lacks the person power, the attorneys and veteran law judges, to address those claims. You may recall a few years ago, the Shulkin tried to have more veteran law judges, but those appointments had to go through the White House, and several of them were killed because it turned out they may have given money or registered to vote as a Democrat. So what happened is the Trump administration politicized the judges who were deciding veteran claim appeals. Now, under the Appeals Modernization, the Board of Veterans Appeals is actually doing a little bit better, a little bit faster on claim processing. We're not happy with the number of denials. Those are going up. But what we find is when those get appealed, VA ends up losing. So that kind of goes over what's going on in the big picture. There's a couple of issues I want to address. The first is the for-profit colleges. Those are veteran benefits. Veterans earn their education benefits due to military service. And it's important that discharges be looked at carefully so that veterans who were improperly kicked out due to PTSD or TBI get their VA benefits so that they can go to college, as well as get their disability benefits. The Trump administration was hands off on the for-profit colleges, and they're starting to come back. Now there's an equally troubling new phenomenon in the last few years called for-profit claims representation. Again, lots of businesses are springing up, and these are multi-million-dollar enterprises. These are not mom and pop shops. And they're literally charging veterans thousands of dollars in fees for a profit company to help with the processing of claims. And why is this happening? Is the major veteran groups are facing budget shortfalls, staffing shortfalls, and that also means that their advocates, there are fewer of them, and a lot of the older ones have retired. So the ones that service officers that are there for these service organizations sometimes don't have the institutional knowledge, and their caseload has gone way up. So that's kind of a perfect storm for the introduction of the privatization of veterans claim assistance. A couple items that were brought up here, it's real important, is VA and COVID claims. The law firm I work, Bergman and Moore, has put out training on how to assist veterans with those claims, because a lot of times there may be underlying secondary conditions that could be made worse or that were the cause of death. And the benefits for veterans or their surviving family members should be very thoroughly explored by a claims expert to make sure that the veteran or family gets what they earn. Another thing that was brought up was how the Trump administration stopped allowing veterans groups to have what was called a 48-hour or 2 business day review of initial VA rating decisions. The Trump administration cut it off for no reason. I want to let you know that Bergman and Moore is the law firm working with the Veterans of Foreign Wars and the Vietnam Veterans of America and AMVETS in order to oppose VA's new rule. Behind the scenes, the VSOs, without attributing to any name or any organization, some of them are not happy with how VBA is treating them. And Jasper really hit the nail on the head. You're exactly right, Jasper. VA is cutting off communications with the press, yes, with Congress, yes, and with veterans organizations. So those are actually quite serious issues. One thing I want to say and add on a piece of good news, and then I can answer any questions, and that is if there's a change in the administration and we still have to wait until January 20th, we can all relax just a little bit that there won't be concerned Veterans for America privatizers literally running the store. So that is a little piece of good news, and I want to end on that. So that's a quick update on VA and claims and what's going on right now.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul. Thanks to all our guests. I'm going to now invite Marilyn Park, who is a representative of the American Federation of Government Employees, to give a quick briefing on where things stand with the public sector labor unions. And then we'll try to squeeze in a couple questions. I think there's another labor representative on as well if they want to add something, but I know time is limited. So Marilyn, go for it.
Sure, thanks. I'll be brief. I think some of my colleagues are on too. They should feel free to chime in. Well, it's a two-part question. There are the attacks on all government employees that have been horrific and got worse recently. If you all remember the Schedule F thing that Trump just did, that would say anybody who has any policy role would be exempt from the bargaining unit because they would be, so that would basically not ever, it would just subject more people to having to be Trump's yes man. They could not have any independent policy views. But I'll go back to the bigger attacks that we had earlier, or the broader ones. But the VA itself, the VA workforce has had a number of attacks on its union rights under its contract with AFGE. What we have in common here is that government-wide and VA specific, they have taken away virtually all time for union reps to represent their coworkers, to work with management on committees, to do anything. So people are beleaguered, especially in COVID, to be trying to do their jobs and find time to represent members who are working under even harsher and more unsafe conditions. So that part of the VA contract that they have repudiated is horrible, especially for medical professionals. And needless to say, like every agency, the contract negotiations that are going on between VA and the Trump administration, just like Social Security, Agriculture, EPA, all the others, is basically stripping away our contracts as we know it, just imposing an edict. And the agency that deals with impasse, called the impasse panel, is all 7 Trump appointees. So like everything else on this call, you can imagine how much we are looking forward to a new executive branch making these decisions. Government-wide, it was there were the government-wide executive orders, which we first succeeded in court in overturning, but then another court decision reinstated them. Also put limits on collective bargaining, took away union time, and as any of you at the VA know, the unions, almost all of them, no longer have any office space at the VA, otherwise they have to pay for it. So no free office space and no free government equipment. So all the unions have had to scramble and find other space. So just declining coal here. So there's very little. Oh, and one last thing, they took away the rights of medical professionals of the VA to have union representation when they're going before an agency board to fight for their jobs. So all we can hope for is Biden has made a very strong commitment to overturn these executive orders as soon as he comes in. And I guess that's where we are.
Great. Thank you so much, Marilyn. Another massive Trump policy, I'll just note right now that Marilyn and many other labor unions are aware of is what's called the VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act. This was one of Trump's first signature veterans laws. And essentially what it did was set up an office that has been used to crack down on whistleblowers rather than protect them, and has targeted frontline employees rather than senior leaders, as was promised. There's a whole lot of good reporting on this office, including by Isaac Arnsdorf at ProPublica, and I've also done something on it as well. I'm happy to answer questions later about that. We're also going to ask Michael Blecker.
I'm here to also talk about, I'm here to follow up on Maryland.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm sorry. Hi, everybody. I'm Elliot Friedman. I'm Maryland's partner in crime. I handle VBA issues primarily. So after following Paul, I really don't have much to add except for a few quick things. One, the performance standards are killing our members, whether they're VSRs, RVSRs, or my favorite example recently is the legal administrative specialists who are in the 8 VBA national call centers answering veterans' questions. We have performance standards everywhere from not only how many veterans we talk to, but how long we're on the phone with them, with a sliding scale of how long we can be on depending on GS level. We can pay under 6.5 minutes, or 7.5 minutes, depending on the GS level, and still fail our average. So it doesn't make exceptions for first notice of death calls where the veteran's spouse is notifying that the veteran died, an aged World War II or Korean War vet, a really bad example of MST or questions. It doesn't differentiate if a veteran has 1 question or 20 questions, nor does it give an exception of if I am the LAS and you are the veteran, I might know of a perfect program for you to apply for, but if I'm running up on my limit, it doesn't behoove me to let you know. The VA would rather you call 2, 3, 4 times in a week, and then members of Congress get involved. So SVAC is aware of this, and we are lobbying hard on this, but that is just one example. This applies to people doing claims processing. They have just had new performance standards implemented on them at the beginning of the fiscal year, leading to another 10% increase in production with nothing else given. I also know I'm speaking for Board of Veterans Appeals attorneys when their production standards continue to get increased without negotiation. That is one of the single biggest things. I'd also just quickly touch on the claims process itself. For the $2 billion that was mentioned for an infusion of VBA technology, during COVID, everybody who logs on at 9 a.m. to go do their job via the VBA gets booted off at noon as the West Coast logs on, and the system can't handle all claims processors simultaneously. So $2 billion if the technologies don't talk to each other and they're using computers that I wouldn't have used when I was in college, it doesn't work for anybody. So there needs to be a better system integration, and if they're going to fix the technology, actually fix it, not just make members be responsible for various things at the same time. Lastly, and this is just 2 points on the national work queue. One, it doesn't say which claims processor processed a claim. So if the VSR does something and the RVSR has a question, pre-national work queue, they were in the same regional office. They could say, hey, Bill, hey, Susie, what's this? Things got fixed quick. Now I don't know if it's Susie or if it's Susie in Oakland. It could be anywhere in the country. They've made it unnecessarily unhelpful. And then lastly, and this is the kicker, my members claim that they do not have enough work, that because work is spread out in the work queue at different points, that their team managers or their coaches need to dole out work, and they do not have enough cases to actually meet their production standard. It's ridiculous. And then lastly, there is no credit given for a deferral. There is no credit given for a denial, only for approval, which grossly makes the system not what it's supposed to be. And then, quite honestly, it doesn't matter if there's an MST claim or a simple audiological claim. To the VA, a claim is a claim is a claim. They are teaching veterans like widgets, not warriors, and we need to stop. And I have long filibustered, and I apologize.
Thank you so much, Elliot. I would just also quickly mention before Michael speaks that a lot of these VHA employees, a lot of these VBA employees are veterans themselves. And, you know, I've spoken to some of these VSRs, these veteran service representatives who entered this work because they wanted to help vets. And because of these incredibly demanding metrics that they're meant to meet and just toxic work conditions, frankly, they are seeing their PTSD flare up. They're becoming incredibly stressed out. They're not able to do this, and they're getting fired because they're barely missing their metrics. So it's really just egregious and needs to stop. And I appreciate your insight there, Elliot. Michael, are you there?
I am, yeah.
Great, go for it.
Thank you so much. So I'll just be very brief because we had a really nice forum on the issue of bad paper and the impact that it's had on services and benefits and so forth. But just to review, 5 years ago, Swords and the National Veterans Legal Services Program filed a rulemaking petition to change the way the VA uses their character of discharge determinations to find someone eligible for VA benefits who received another honorable discharge, right? We know sort of the premise of all that. So on September 8th, they finally released their proposed rules, and we had some real problems with their proposed rules. And so we submitted a response to that, and we expect those actual rules themselves, I believe, will be available or will be completed, I think, within the first part of next year. The fall, I believe. I don't know, Paul, if you know more about that on when we can expect a response. But, you know, a lot of this is, you know, premised on the fact that, you know, the importance of, you know, you know, finding out about the inner machinery and the important role that Freedom of Information Act has on the whole system. And obviously, you know, folks around on this call know the importance of reporting and, you know, probing, because it's so difficult to find and learn about the machinery of this, of how these determinations are made. But the bigger picture is how the military relates, how military justice works, and the implications that has on folks who leave the service with another honorable discharge. And so it's, you know, you can't pry any kind of negative news out of the military without some serious leverage. And of course, we know all the situation that happened at Fort Carson, that took media, that took an exposure, that took insiders, took courageous folks like Steve Robinson and others to probe that. But that's what it takes, because you can't find that. The military will not release that information. Even something simple about food security issues and how many active duty families are on food stamps. You know, we tried to get that information and the military denied it. We probed and probed and probed. So I'm just saying that you really have to keep at it. And so in addition to the rulemaking petition, I just wanted to, you may or may not know this, but we, let me just make sure I get this straight, you know, on, let's see, here we go. So we proposed an FOIA request to find out how the VA, what the VA was considering with their COD rulemaking case. And we specifically, we worked with the Latham attorneys. They have spoken with the assistant U.S. attorney who's been assigned to the case. And we've asked them specific things. We've asked them things like documents, publications, studies, or information considered in developing the proposed rules, communications pertaining to the proposed rules. And so we're trying to find out, what did they consider when they proposed? Because that's the level it takes, right? That's the level it takes. So, and I'll say, you know, further, a lot of this, what we've learned about, besides our own experiences being in the military, about military justice, but just the fact that it took incredible probing by the Protect Our Defenders, who released a study in 2017 about the racial disparities in military justice and what they learned about the different branches of service and how veterans, minority veterans, are treated and are subject to more severe discipline, and particularly in regards to each branch of service. But that's what it will take. It will take really pushing, pressing, both with this administration and of course with the way the military functions, which really, let's face it, the military is the one that creates the stress, the trauma, the terrible conditions that folks have to live with the rest of their lives. And finally, I will say something. It's very important that the VA continues to support some of the emergency housing and the rental vouchers that have come forth, and allowing during this pandemic veterans to get hotel rooms or emergency housing, and whether or not that's going to be continued. And that's all based on the CARES provision that was, you know, that was passed, right? Anyway, that's my very brief report. Thank you.
So I just want to add something to that. I think that it's really critical for us all, and particularly for the VSO community, to do education around this issue, around the petition and around other efforts to include other than honorable discharges, because we have heard from many, many veterans and a number of VSOs that their members and the individual veterans don't support these other than, these veterans with bad papers getting into the VA, because many veterans don't understand that, that these veterans have PTSD or MST or some kind of psychological psychological problem that was exacerbated or acquired in the service. And their view is, wait a minute, they don't deserve it. And I think that we really need to view these services and benefits that veterans get as an occupational illness. I mean, in the workman's comp system, if you get black lung because you work in an unsafe mine, or you have your arm cut off because you work, in an unsafe manufacturing facility, you don't not get workers' comp because you got into a fight with the foreman, or you got drunk on the weekend. And I think there really needs to be a huge educational effort, because I think the public supports this more often than the veteran community. And we really need to change that.
If folks have any questions, they can add them in the chat. I saw a couple that have passed through, a lot of them concerned about the transition, about how Biden is going to, move forward. And there's still a lot we don't know. Unfortunately, even though the VA is the second largest federal agency, oftentimes lawmakers of all stripes, all positions don't pay it much mind. Biden has certainly given a lot of rhetorical attention to veterans. And as we all know, his son Bo served and died perhaps of exposure, or of rare cancer brought on by exposure to toxic burn pits. Someone in the comments noted that may make Biden more eager to address that issue. It's sort of the Agent Orange of the new generation. And as we all know, it's taken decades and decades and decades to claw some benefits for folks who've gotten sick from Agent Orange. So hopefully Biden, will move productively on some of those issues and ensure that vets are being treated well. But, again, there's a lot we don't know. And so the real work that needs to be done is just ensuring that Biden makes good promises, and educating his folks on these issues. One thing that Russell was going to talk about a little bit is the Air Commission. I don't know if you want to get in on that now, Russell, but essentially very soon, once Biden is in office, he will be able to appoint members of a commission, an asset and infrastructure review commission, that will make wide-ranging recommendations for the VA's infrastructure footprint in the future. In the past, when this has happened at the DoD, what we've seen are facilities shut down. There's obviously a lot of political fighting over those decisions, because no lawmaker wants a facility shut down in their district, but it's certainly a scary prospect. And while certain VA facilities may be underutilized today, if history is any judge, I am sure we will unfortunately get ourselves tangled up in some conflict down the road. I don't see a future where veterans are no longer being created by this government. So that's something that we should also be on the lookout for. Russell, is there anything you'd like to add about that?
Probably none. I think we're nearing the end anyway, Jasper, other than to say it is something that we should keep on the front burner, keep on our radar. The potential downside to the Air Commission is pretty significant. I'm pretty concerned with the fact that there's no requirement in the legislation for recommendations where they could shut down VA facilities, that they could do that even if it was more costly to shut it down than to keep them open, which of course at its core is a privatization agenda, if that's the case.
Yes, this has been more than an hour, and that's a long time. So I've put the email address for Veterans Policy, Healthcare Policy Institute, which is exec director at Veterans Policy. That's in the chat. If anyone has follow-ups, concerns, questions, they can email that account and get some help. We appreciate you all for tuning in, for supporting VHPI. If you want to give some money to us, we would certainly appreciate it. We are doing a lot of work, often on a volunteer basis. And so any support really helps. You can find us at veteranspolicy.org, where you can donate, read our policy work, read our investigative reporting, all that sort of stuff. So on behalf of VHPI, thank you all for coming, and we hope to talk to you soon. Thanks so much.